They thought I was just another homeless woman crashing their fancy wedding. They had no idea I was about to become the owner of the most expensive private residence in the state. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic across from the Riverside Country Club, watching guests in designer gowns and tailored suits walk into my sister Madison's wedding. The invitation said, "Black tie optional." I was wearing the only clean clothes I had, jeans and a thrift store blouse that didn't quite fit. 3 months ago, I had been sleeping in that same car. Today, I was about to discover that the military contract I'd lost contact with had just made me wealthier than everyone in that ballroom combined. My name is Victoria Hayes, and 18 months ago, I was living a completely different life. I had a corner office on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Chicago, overlooking Lake Michigan. The brass nameplate on my door read Hayes & Morrison Architectural Design, and we were one of the fastest-growing firms in the Midwest. I'd built that company from nothing. After graduating summa cum laude from Illinois Institute of Technology with my master's in architecture, I spent 3 years at a prestigious firm learning the business. Then I met Jake Morrison at a conference in Denver. He had the connections, I had the talent, and together we thought we could conquer the architectural world. For 5 years it worked. We landed major contracts: the new Performing Arts Center in Evanston, a luxury hotel complex in Springfield, and the crown jewel, the Children's Hospital of Chicago's new wing. That project put us on the map. The design won 3 national awards and was featured in Architectural Digest. Suddenly, everyone wanted to work with Hayes & Morrison. Madison was never impressed. While I was pulling 16-hour days and traveling to construction sites, she was focused on what she called the important things in life. She dropped out of Northwestern after 2 years to focus on finding the right husband. Not just any husband, specifically a wealthy one who could provide the lifestyle she felt she deserved. "Victoria, you work too much," she'd say whenever we had dinner. "When are you going to settle down and start a real family?" Trevor's friend Marcus just got divorced. He owns 3 car dealerships. Madison had found her target in Trevor Blackstone. His family owned Blackstone Properties, one of the largest commercial real estate companies in Illinois. Trevor himself was charming in that effortless way that only comes with generational wealth. He'd never worked a real job in his life, but he had perfect teeth and looked good in a tuxedo. When Madison announced their engagement, the family treated it like she'd won the lottery. Our parents threw them a $50,000 engagement party at the country club. Everyone kept saying how lucky Madison was, how she'd chosen well, how Trevor was such a catch. No one mentioned that I'd just signed a $3.2 million contract to design a new corporate headquarters. Success in my family was measured differently for daughters. Madison's accomplishment was landing a rich man. Mine were just career things that would eventually take a back seat to marriage and children. But I was happy. I loved my work, I loved creating spaces that would outlast me, and I was finally making the kind of money that meant I never had to depend on anyone else. I bought a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park, drove a BMW, and had a closet full of designer suits. I was living the life I'd worked for. Then I met Richard Caldwell at Madison's engagement party. Richard was a lawyer, corporate litigation with a firm that represented several Fortune 500 companies. He was older than me by 8 years, sophisticated, and unlike most of the men I'd dated, he seemed genuinely interested in my career. We talked for hours about architecture and law, about building codes and property rights. He asked intelligent questions about my projects and actually listened to the answers. Madison approved, which should have been my first warning sign. Finally, she said when I told her Richard had asked me out, "Someone age-appropriate with a real career. Trevor's mother will be so relieved. You're not going to be the spinster sister forever." Richard pursued me with the same focused intensity he brought to his legal cases. Flowers every Friday, dinner at the best restaurants in the city, weekend trips to his cabin in Wisconsin. He made me feel like I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met. When he proposed 6 months later with a 3-carat diamond ring, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. We honeymooned in Italy, staying in converted palazzos and touring architectural marvels I'd studied in school. Richard photographed me in front of the Duomo in Florence, the Colosseum in Rome, the canals in Venice. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. For the first year of marriage, everything was perfect. Richard was supportive of my work, even proud of it. When I won the contract for the hospital wing, he threw a celebration party and invited all his colleagues. He introduced me as my brilliant wife, the architect. I felt seen, valued, appreciated. But success changes things. As Hayes and Morrison grew, I was traveling more, working longer hours, bringing home bigger contracts. The hospital project required me to be on site almost daily for 8 months. I was managing a team of 40 contractors and subcontractors, dealing with city inspectors, coordinating with hospital administrators. It was the most challenging and rewarding work of my career. Richard started making comments, small ones at first. "You missed dinner again tonight." "I had to tell the Jamersons you couldn't make their party because you were working. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to your job instead of you." I tried to balance things better. I started delegating more to Jake, turning down some travel opportunities, keeping my phone on silent during dinner. But the complaints continued. "Victoria, we need to talk about priorities," Richard said one evening after I'd returned from a 3-day construction meeting in Springfield. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. I feel like I'm coming in second to concrete and steel beams." I thought he was just going through an adjustment period. I thought once the hospital project was finished, things would calm down and we could focus on our relationship. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be completely wrong. The first sign of real trouble came when Richard started attending Jake's monthly progress meetings. Like my husband, he claimed he was interested in the business. As a lawyer, he said he wanted to make sure our contracts were properly structured. I was touched that he cared enough to get involved. Jake welcomed Richard's input. They started having lunch meetings without me, discussing legal strategies and, quote, business optimization. Richard suggested we restructure the partnership agreement to, quote, protect both partners' interests more effectively. The new agreement was 40 pages of dense legal language that Richard assured me was standard practice and much more favorable than our original handshake deal. I signed it without reading every word. Richard was my husband. Jake was my business partner and friend. I trusted them both completely. That trust would cost me everything. The end began with what seemed like a normal Tuesday morning. I was reviewing blueprints for our latest project when Jake knocked on my office door. His face was serious in a way I'd never seen before. "Victoria, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "Richard called me last night. He's filing for divorce." The words didn't make sense at first. Richard and I had argued more frequently lately, but divorce? We'd never even discussed marriage counseling. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Richard's at his office. We had coffee together this morning." Jake sat down across from my desk, looking uncomfortable. "He's been planning this for months, Victoria. He's claiming the business assets are marital property. His lawyer contacted me yesterday with papers." My hands started shaking. "Papers for what?" "They're freezing the business accounts. All of them. Operating expenses, payroll, everything. Until the divorce is settled, we can't access any company funds." That's when I understood what the new partnership agreement had really been about. Richard hadn't been protecting both partners' interests. He'd been positioning himself to claim half of everything I'd built. The next 3 months were a blur of lawyers, court hearings, and depositions. Richard's legal team painted me as a workaholic wife who'd neglected her marriage in favor of career ambition. They presented evidence of my long work hours, my business trips, my obsession with professional success at the expense of personal relationships. Jake, who I'd considered one of my closest friends, sided with Richard's version of events. He testified that I'd become increasingly difficult to work with and unreasonably demanding as the business grew. He claimed I'd pushed him out of major decisions and treated him more like an employee than a partner. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. Jake and Richard had documented everything. Every late night at the office, every business trip, every time I'd prioritized a client deadline over a dinner party. They'd built a case that portrayed me as someone who cared more about buildings than people. The final blow came when the judge ruled on the asset division. Because of the partnership agreement I'd signed, Richard was entitled to half of my share of the business. But Jake had simultaneously filed to dissolve the partnership, claiming irreconcilable differences in business vision. In a single day, I lost my husband, my business partner, and my company. Jake kept the Hayes and Morrison name and most of our clients. Richard got half of my assets, including my stake in the firm and our house. I walked away with my car, my personal belongings, and a reputation so damaged that no architectural firm in Chicago would hire me. Within 6 months, I'd gone from being a successful business owner to living in my car behind a 24-hour diner, using their bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. The woman who'd once designed award-winning buildings was now wondering where she'd find her next meal. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The first night I slept in my car, I kept thinking someone would come looking for me. That Madison would call, worried about where I was staying. That my parents would reach out after hearing about the divorce. That someone from my old life would notice I'd disappeared and care enough to check on me. No one called. I parked behind Giuseppe's all-night diner on Route 41, a 24-hour truck stop where the parking lot was always full and one more car wouldn't draw attention. The owner, Maria Santos, was a 60-year-old woman who'd emigrated from Mexico 30 years earlier and built the place into a local institution. She worked 16-hour days, knew every regular customer by name, and had a soft spot for people down on their luck. After 3 nights of seeing my Honda in the same spot, Maria knocked on my window at sunrise. "Honey," she said in accented English, "you can't live out here. It's not safe." I rolled down the window, humiliated but too exhausted to lie. "I don't have anywhere else to go right now. I'm sorry if I'm causing problems. I can move." Maria studied my face for a long moment. "You hungry?" That's how I met the woman who kept me alive for the next 8 months. Maria never asked too many questions about why I was living in my car. She let me use the diner's bathroom to wash up, gave me leftover food from the kitchen, and eventually offered me a deal. Clean the diner after closing time in exchange for $20 cash and a hot meal. It wasn't charity. Maria made me work for every dollar. I scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, washed dishes, and took out garbage. My hands, which had once held drafting pencils and architectural models, were now cracked and raw from industrial cleaning chemicals. But Maria also did something unexpected. She talked to me. "You're educated," she said one night as I mopped the dining room floor. "I can tell by how you speak, how you hold yourself. What happened?" I told her everything. About the business, the marriage, the betrayal. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. "My first husband," she said when I finished, "he left me when I was pregnant with my son, took all our money and moved to Texas with his secretary. I thought my life was over." She gestured around the diner. "Now I own this place. My son is a doctor in California, and my ex-husband, last I heard, he was living in a trailer park in Galveston." "How did you survive it?" I asked. "One day at a time," Maria said, "and I never stopped believing I deserved better." Living in my car was harder than anything I'd ever experienced. Nights were the worst, especially in winter. I'd run the engine for 20 minutes at a time to stay warm, then turn it off to conserve gas. I learned which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms, which parking lots were safest for sleeping, which fast food places would let me sit for hours nursing a single coffee. My phone still worked, but the contacts list might as well have been empty. Former colleagues either didn't return my calls or offered empty sympathy, followed by explanations about why they couldn't help. "The industry is so competitive right now," they'd say. "With everything that happened, it might be better to wait until things settle down." Madison was the worst. When I finally swallowed my pride and called her 3 weeks after moving into my car, her response was breathtaking in its callousness. "Victoria, I'm planning a wedding. I can't deal with your drama right now." "I'm not asking you to deal with anything," I said. "I just need a place to stay for a few weeks while I figure things out." "Stay where? In my guest room? What would I tell Trevor's family? They already think our family is," she paused, searching for the right word, "complicated." "Complicated?" "Look, you made choices. You chose career over marriage, work over family. These are the consequences. Maybe this is a wake-up call that you need to reassess your priorities." The conversation ended with Madison suggesting I move back in with our parents in Wisconsin until I got back on my feet. When I called them, my mother's response was even more devastating. "Oh, honey, we'd love to help. but your father's back surgery, and the house is so small now that we've turned your room into his physical therapy space. Maybe Madison could. Everyone had reasons why they couldn't help, but they all had suggestions for what I should do differently, how I should have handled my marriage better, how I should have seen the signs, how I should have prioritized family over career. The isolation was crushing, but it also taught me something valuable. When you have nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid of failure. That's when the government contract email arrived. I was using the free Wi-Fi at a McDonald's, applying for administrative assistant jobs on Craigslist, when I saw it in my spam folder. The subject line read, RFP, Secure Residential Facility Design, Department of Defense. Request for proposal. Someone was looking for an architect to design a high-security residential compound for military use. The project budget was listed as classified, but the scope was enormous. A 50-acre site requiring both luxury amenities and advanced security features. I almost deleted it. Why would the Department of Defense want to work with an architect who was currently homeless? But something made me click through to read the full specifications. They wanted someone with experience in both residential and institutional design. Someone who understood structural engineering, security systems, and high-end finishes. Someone who could create a space that felt like a home, but functioned like a fortress. I knew I could do it. More than that, I knew I could do it better than any of the big firms that would inevitably bid on the project. I'd spent years learning every aspect of architectural design, from foundation work to interior finishing. I understood how buildings needed to function for the people who lived in them, not just how they looked on paper. The deadline for proposals was in 2 weeks. I had no office, no drafting equipment, no team. What I had was a laptop, 8 years of architectural experience, and absolutely nothing to lose. I spent every waking hour for the next 10 days in that McDonald's, using their Wi-Fi and electrical outlets to create the most comprehensive proposal I'd ever written. I researched military security requirements, studied government facility standards, and designed a compound that would revolutionize how the military thought about secure housing. The key insight came from my own experience of homelessness. I understood, in a way I never had before, how important it was for a space to feel safe. Not just physically secure, but emotionally safe. A place where someone could let their guard down, even in the most dangerous circumstances. My design incorporated hidden security features that were completely invisible to residents. Bulletproof glass that looked like regular windows. Reinforced walls disguised as decorative elements. Safe rooms that appeared to be walk-in closets. Every room had multiple exit routes, but they were integrated so seamlessly into the architecture that guests would never feel like they were staying in a bunker. I submitted the proposal at 11:47 p.m. on the deadline day, 3 minutes before the McDonald's Wi-Fi was scheduled to shut down. Then I waited. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing. I started to assume my proposal had been rejected or ignored. Government contracts usually went to established firms with security clearances and existing relationships. Why would they choose a homeless architect working out of a fast food restaurant? The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was cleaning Giuseppe's diner. Ms. Hayes, this is Colonel Patricia Wells from the Army Corps of Engineers. We'd like to discuss your proposal for Project Stronghold. I had to sit down. You want to discuss it? Ms. Hayes, your design is extraordinary. We've never seen anything like it. When can you come in for a meeting? I looked around the diner, at the mop in my hands and my reflection in the window. I was wearing jeans with holes in the knees and a sweatshirt I'd gotten from a thrift store. When would be convenient for you? I asked. How about Thursday at 2 p.m., Pentagon, Arlington, can you make it? The Pentagon. I was going to the Pentagon. Yes, I said, I'll be there. After I hung up, Maria found me sitting in the back booth, staring at my phone. Good news? She asked. I said slowly, my life just changed. What I didn't know was that it was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. I had exactly $47 to my name and no appropriate clothes for a Pentagon meeting. The only professional outfit I owned had been destroyed months earlier when my car's roof leaked during a thunderstorm, soaking everything in the back seat. Maria noticed me staring hopelessly into my car trunk that Wednesday evening, trying to figure out how to look presentable for the most important meeting of my life. "What size are you?" she asked. 8, but Maria, I can't. My daughter Rosa, she interrupted. She's a lawyer in Springfield. Left some clothes in my closet when she visited last month. The next morning, Maria handed me a garment bag containing a navy blue suit, cream blouse, and black pumps that fit perfectly. She also pressed a $50 bill into my hand. "For the train ticket," she said when I tried to refuse, "and lunch, you can't meet with generals on an empty stomach." The train to Washington, D.C. was the first time I'd left Illinois in 8 months. As suburban Chicago gave way to farmland, and then urban sprawl, I felt like I was traveling to another planet. The last time I'd worn professional clothes or sat in a meeting with government officials seemed like someone else's life. The Pentagon was unlike anything I'd imagined. Massive, imposing, but also surprisingly bustling with everyday people going about their jobs. After clearing multiple security checkpoints, I was escorted through endless corridors to a conference room with no windows and fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly green. Colonel Patricia Wells was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a precise bun and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess everything they saw. She was flanked by 2 other officers and a civilian contractor whose badge identified him as James Patterson from Pentagon Procurement. "Ms. Hayes," Colonel Wells stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." The conference table was covered with printouts of my proposal, marked up with notes and highlighted sections. They'd studied it thoroughly. "Your design," Colonel Wells began, "addresses problems we didn't even know we had. Most security architects focus on keeping threats out. You've created something that protects occupants while maintaining the psychological comfort of a luxury home." She flipped through several pages of my proposal, pointing to specific elements. Hidden panic rooms disguised as wine cellars, bulletproof windows that provide unobstructed views, emergency escape routes integrated into the landscape design. And this, she paused at a detailed drawing, a helipad that doubles as a garden terrace when not in use. Brilliant. James Patterson leaned forward. "Ms. Hayes, what's your experience with government security clearances?" I felt my stomach drop. "I don't currently hold any clearances." "That's fine," Colonel Wells said quickly. "We can expedite the process. What we need to know is whether you can handle the confidentiality requirements. This project, if you accept it, will be classified. You won't be able to discuss it with anyone outside the approved personnel list." "I understand." "The site," she continued, "is 47 acres in Lake Forest, Illinois. We've been looking for the right property for 2 years. It's currently undeveloped but has lake access, mature trees, and complete privacy. Perfect for what we need." One of the other officers, a Major Rodriguez, according to his nameplate, spoke up. "The timeline is aggressive. We need construction to begin within 6 months, and completion within 18 months. Can you handle that kind of schedule?" I thought about the hospital project, managing dozens of contractors and subcontractors, coordinating with multiple agencies and inspectors. "Yes, sir, with the right team." "About the team," Colonel Wells said, "we'll be providing the construction crew, all cleared personnel. Your job is design, oversight, and problem solving. You'll have a military liaison on site daily and direct communication with this office." Patterson slid a thick folder across the table. "Contract terms. The compensation structure is unusual for a project of this scope." I opened the folder and nearly dropped it. The numbers were staggering. Not just the design fee, which was more than I'd made in my best year at Hayes & Morrison, but the completion bonus and the final clause that made my breath catch. "Property transfer?" I read aloud. "Upon successful completion and acceptance of the project," Colonel Wells explained, "ownership of the property and all structures transfers to the contractor. It's a unique arrangement, but this is a unique project." I stared at the contract terms. They were offering me not just enough money to rebuild my life, but enough to never worry about security again. Plus ownership of what would be one of the most valuable private properties in Illinois. "Why me?" I asked. "There are established firms with security clearances, government experience, bigger teams." Colonel Wells exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Ms. Hayes, we've reviewed proposals from 17 different firms. Yours was the only one that understood something crucial. The people who stay in secure facilities are often dealing with extreme stress, trauma, or threat levels. They need space that feels like a sanctuary, not a bunker. She pulled out another document. Your background check revealed your recent difficulties. Financial hardship, divorce, loss of business partnership. Some might see those as red flags. My heart sank. We see them as qualifications, she continued. You understand what it means to need safety, real safety, in ways that successful architects in glass towers never will. That perspective is exactly what this project requires. Major Rodriguez nodded. The people who'll use this facility are high-value targets. Foreign diplomats, military leaders, intelligence assets. They're living under constant threat. They need space that feels like home, not a prison. If you accept, Patterson added, you'll need to relocate to the area immediately. We'll provide temporary housing and a security detail during construction. This project has to remain completely confidential. I thought about my car in Giuseppe's parking lot, about Maria's kindness, about sleeping on reclined seats and washing my hair in truck stop bathrooms, about Madison's wedding invitation sitting on the McDonald's table where I'd been applying for minimum wage jobs. When do you need an answer? Now, Colonel Wells said. This briefing is classified. If you decline, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and that's the end of it. If you accept, we will begin security clearance processing tomorrow. I looked around the room at these military officers who'd just offered me a chance to rebuild my entire life. They were betting on me when my own family wouldn't even let me sleep on their couch. I accept. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of paperwork, security briefings, and initial planning sessions. I signed more documents than I'd signed for my marriage and divorce combined. Patterson explained the payment structure. Initial advance within 48 hours. Progress payments tied to construction milestones. Final payment and property transfer upon completion. Colonel Wells handed me a secure phone and a contact list. Your military liaison will be Captain Sarah Mitchell. She'll meet you at the Lake Forest site tomorrow morning at 0800. From now on, all project communication goes through official channels only. As I prepared to leave, Major Rodriguez pulled me aside. Ms. Hayes, I want you to know something. I've been involved in military construction for 15 years. This is the most important residential security project I've ever seen. The people who'll stay here, their safety could affect national security. We're trusting you with something huge. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. For months, I'd felt invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. Now I was being handed a project that could impact the safety of diplomats and military leaders. On the train back to Chicago, I stared out the window at the passing landscape, trying to process what had just happened. This morning, I'd been a homeless woman cleaning a diner. Tonight, I was a government contractor with a classified project and a secure phone. When I got back to Giuseppe's, Maria was waiting in the parking lot. How did it go? She asked. I thought about the non-disclosure agreement I'd signed, about the classified nature of everything I'd just learned. I got the job, I said simply. Maria's face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. I knew it. I knew you were meant for something bigger than mopping floors. That night, I slept in my car for the last time. Tomorrow, I would drive to Lake Forest and begin building something extraordinary. Something that would change not just my life, but potentially save the lives of people I'd never meet. I didn't know it yet, but I was also building my way back to a confrontation with the people who'd written me off. Madison's wedding was still 6 months away, and by then, I would be someone completely different from the broken woman they remembered. The property transfer clause in my contract meant I wouldn't just be the architect of Project Stronghold. I would be its owner, possessor of one of the most secure and valuable private residences in the country. But first, I had to build it. The Lake Forest property was breathtaking, 47 acres of rolling hills dotted with century-old oak trees, stretching down to a private stretch of Lake Michigan shoreline. Standing at the main entrance gate, I could see why the military had chosen this location. Complete privacy, natural barriers, and enough space to build something extraordinary without any neighbors to ask questions. Captain Sarah Mitchell was waiting for me at exactly 0800, just as Colonel Wells had promised. She was probably 35, with the kind of efficient professionalism that made every movement seem purposeful. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but brief. "Ms. Hayes, welcome to Project Stronghold. I'll be your primary liaison throughout construction. Anything you need, any problems that arise, you call me first." She handed me a hard hat and safety vest, both stamped with security clearance codes I was still learning to understand. "The site survey team finished last week," she explained as we walked toward the center of the property. "Ground conditions are excellent. No environmental issues, solid bedrock about 12 feet down, and the city of Lake Forest has already approved all necessary permits." "How did you get permits without revealing the project details?" "Officially, this is a private luxury residence for an undisclosed client. The city planning office knows it's a high-security installation, but they don't know it's military. As far as they're concerned, some billionaire wants a very private vacation home." The temporary construction office was a series of connected trailers surrounded by security fencing. Inside, the main trailer had been converted into a sophisticated command center, with secure communications equipment, multiple computer terminals, and wall-mounted displays showing construction timelines and security protocols. "Your office," Captain Mitchell said, opening the door to a smaller trailer that had been outfitted with drafting tables, CAD workstations, and a conference area. "All equipment is cleared for classified use. The internet connection is military-grade secure." For the next 6 months, this trailer became my world. I arrived every morning at 6 a.m. and rarely left before 8 p.m. The construction crew was unlike anything I'd worked with before. Every electrician, plumber, and carpenter had security clearance. They were all former military or current reservists, carefully vetted and sworn to secrecy. The foreman, Master Sergeant Ray Thompson, had overseen construction projects in Iraq and Afghanistan. He understood both the technical requirements and the security implications of what we were building. "Ma'am," he said during our first planning meeting, "I've built forward operating bases under enemy fire. This is the most complex project I've ever managed, but also the most exciting. What you've designed here, it's like nothing I've ever seen." The house began to take shape rapidly. From the outside, it looked like an elegant but unremarkable luxury home. Natural stone and cedar siding, large windows overlooking the lake, landscaping that appeared casual but was actually carefully planned to provide sightlines and defensive positions. The real innovation was invisible. Every window was bulletproof but appeared to be regular glass. The walls contained steel mesh and Kevlar layers disguised within standard insulation. The foundation included a tunnel system connecting to multiple exit points across the property. Even the swimming pool had a hidden underwater entrance to the main house. My favorite feature was the library. To casual visitors, it appeared to be a comfortable reading room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But behind a section of fake book spines was a fully equipped safe room with independent air supply, satellite communication, and enough provisions for 2 weeks. The master bedroom closet concealed an armory. The wine cellar doubled as a blast shelter. The 3-car garage had hydraulic lifts that could raise the floor to reveal an underground vehicle bay with armored cars. Every detail was both functional and beautiful. I'd learned from my homelessness experience that feeling safe wasn't just about security systems. It was about comfort, privacy, and the psychological assurance that you belonged somewhere no one could reach you. Working on the project was consuming, but it was also healing. For the first time in over a year, I woke up each day excited about what I was building. I had purpose, respect, and the resources to create something truly extraordinary. The military housing they'd provided was a furnished apartment in downtown Lake Forest, comfortable but unremarkable. I kept the same cell phone number, hoping someone from my old life might reach out. No one did. Madison's wedding invitations went out in March. Mine arrived at the apartment, forwarded from an address I'd never lived at. The envelope was addressed to Victoria Hayes, with no title, no acknowledgement of my professional status. Inside, a note in Madison's handwriting. "Hope you can make it. Ceremony is at 4 p.m., reception immediately following. Dress code, cocktail attire." No personal message. No, "I've missed you," or "I hope you're doing well." Just the basic information needed to attend her wedding. I hadn't spoken to Madison since that terrible phone call 8 months earlier. She had no idea where I was living, what I was doing, or whether I was even alive. As far as my family knew, I'd disappeared after the divorce, too ashamed to maintain contact. The truth was more complicated. I'd wanted to call, especially during the worst nights in my car when loneliness felt like a physical weight on my chest. But pride and hurt had kept me silent. If they'd written me off so easily, if they could dismiss my pain and struggles as drama and poor choices, then maybe I was better off without them. Still, receiving the invitation stirred something in me. Madison was my sister. We'd grown up sharing a bedroom, building blanket forts, planning our futures together before those futures diverged so dramatically. Some part of me wanted to believe that underneath the cruelty and selfishness, she still cared about me. But I wasn't ready to reveal what my life had become. The project was still classified. I couldn't explain why I was living in Lake Forest, what I was working on, or how dramatically my circumstances had changed. To them, I would still appear to be the failed architect who'd lost everything in a messy divorce. I called in sick to the construction site the day I received the invitation and spent hours walking the property trying to decide what to do. The house was 60% complete, its skeleton clearly visible but its secrets still hidden. In 6 weeks, when Madison said I do to Trevor Blackstone, I would be putting finishing touches on what would become my own home. The irony was perfect. While Madison was marrying for money and status, I was building something that would make me wealthier than her new husband's family. While she was planning a wedding to secure her financial future, I was creating a future that belonged entirely to me. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know that. Captain Mitchell found me sitting on the unfinished front steps, staring at the invitation. "Personal mail?" she asked, settling beside me. "My sister's wedding invitation. You don't look happy about it." I told her the story about the divorce, the homelessness, the family's abandonment, Madison's cruelty. Captain Mitchell listened without judgment, occasionally nodding. "Are you going?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. They think I'm still the same broken person they rejected 8 months ago. They have no idea what I've become." "Maybe," Captain Mitchell said. "It's time they found out." "I can't talk about this project." "No, but you don't have to. Sometimes the most powerful statement is just showing up as who you are now, not who they remember." That evening, I made 2 decisions. First, I would attend Madison's wedding. Second, I would let them draw their own conclusions about what my presence meant. I had no way of knowing that Colonel Wells would choose that exact day to make an unscheduled site visit, that she would arrive at the country club to find me, ready to hand over the keys to a $12 million property that I'd designed and now owned. Sometimes the universe has a sense of timing that's too perfect to be coincidence. The final phase of construction began the next Monday. In 6 weeks, I would walk into Riverside Country Club as a property owner worth more than everyone in that ballroom combined. But first, I had to finish building my fortress. The morning of Madison's wedding, I stood in my Lake Forest apartment bathroom, staring at my reflection and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. The woman looking back at me was healthier than she'd been in over a year. Regular meals and steady work had filled out my face and put color back in my cheeks. But I was still nervous about facing my family. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a simple black dress I'd bought at Nordstrom with my first Project Stronghold paycheck, understated jewelry, and low heels. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention or hint at how dramatically my life had changed. I wanted to blend in, observe, and leave quietly. The drive to Riverside Country Club took 25 minutes through neighborhoods where I'd once dreamed of building custom homes for wealthy clients. Now I was wealthier than most of the people who lived there, but they would never know it. I parked in the back of the lot, away from the main entrance where Madison's photographer was capturing arrivals. Through my windshield, I watched cousins and family friends I hadn't seen since my own wedding, all dressed in their country club finest, air-kissing, and making the kind of small talk that passed for connection in my family's social circle. My phone buzzed with a text from Captain Mitchell. "Final walkthrough scheduled for Monday. House will be officially yours Tuesday morning. How's the wedding?" I typed back, about to find out. Walking into that club felt like entering enemy territory. The lobby was all marble and crystal, designed to intimidate people who didn't belong. The guest book table was staffed by one of Madison's bridesmaids, a woman named Ashley Cunningham who'd been in our high school class and had married a hedge fund manager right after college. "Victoria!" Ashley's surprise seemed genuine, though not necessarily pleasant. "Oh my goodness, I wasn't sure you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss my sister's wedding," I said, signing the guest book with hands that were steadier than I felt. "Of course not. How have you been? We heard about everything with Richard and the business. So awful." The sympathy in her voice was exactly the kind I'd learned to recognize during my lowest point, the tone people used when they were glad your problems weren't theirs. "I'm doing well," I said simply. Ashley's eyes scanned my dress, my shoes, my purse, clearly trying to assess my current financial status. "That's wonderful. Are you working somewhere new?" "I'm working on a project in Lake Forest." "Oh, how nice. Real estate development can be so rewarding." I didn't correct her assumption. Let her think whatever she wanted. The cocktail hour was a masterclass in social discomfort. I moved through the crowd like a ghost from another life, recognizing faces but feeling completely disconnected from these people who'd once been my peers. Conversations stopped when I approached, then resumed in whispers after I passed. I overheard fragments. Heard she lost everything, living in her car for months. Such a shame, she used to be so successful. Madison was holding court near the bar, radiant in a beaded cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was surrounded by Trevor's family, his mother Eleanor, his sister Bethany, and an assortment of aunts and cousins who all had that particular look of people who'd never worried about money. When Madison spotted me across the room, her smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. She excused herself from her conversation and approached with the kind of careful steps people use when they're not sure if they're walking toward a friend or a bomb. "Victoria," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that didn't quite connect. "You came." "Of course I came." "You look," she paused, clearly struggling for the right word. "Good. Better than I expected." "Thank you?" Madison's laugh was forced. "I just meant, after everything you've been through, it's nice to see you taking care of yourself." Before I could respond, Eleanor Blackstone materialized beside us like a silk-clad predator. She was exactly what I'd expected from Madison's descriptions. Impeccably groomed, dripping with expensive jewelry, and radiating the kind of entitlement that came from generations of inherited wealth. "Eleanor," Madison said quickly, "this is my sister Victoria. Victoria, this is Trevor's mother." Eleanor's handshake was limp, her smile sharp. "Of course, the architect. Madison has told us so much about you." I could imagine exactly what Madison had told them. "How lovely that you could attend," Eleanor continued. "I understand you've been going through a difficult period." "Life has had its challenges," I replied carefully. "Of course. Divorce can be so destabilizing, especially when careers are involved." Her tone suggested she was discussing a mildly unpleasant medical condition. "But I'm sure you'll land on your feet eventually. Women are so resilient these days." The condescension was breathtaking. She was talking to me like I was a charity case Madison had brought to the wedding out of pity. "What sort of work are you doing now?" Eleanor asked. "Madison mentioned you were between opportunities." "I'm working on a residential project." "How nice. Construction can be so steady, even if it's not particularly creative." She thought I was working construction, manual labor, and Madison was letting her think it. "Eleanor," Madison interrupted, "we should probably start seating people for the ceremony." As Eleanor glided away to manage her guests, Madison turned back to me with something that might have been embarrassment. "She doesn't mean anything by it," Madison said. "She's just protective of the family's image." "What exactly did you tell them about me?" Madison's cheeks flushed slightly. "Just that you'd hit a rough patch after your divorce. That you were figuring things out." "Figuring things out?" "Victoria, you have to understand, Trevor's family moves in certain circles. They have expectations about the kinds of people they associate with. I couldn't exactly..." "Couldn't it be exactly what?" "Couldn't tell them my sister was homeless," she finished quietly. "It would reflect badly on all of us." The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they weren't true. I had been homeless. But because of how ashamed she was of that fact. how desperate she was to distance herself from my struggles. "So what did you tell them I do for work?" "I said you were in construction. Temporary work while you got back on your feet." Construction, temporary work, getting back on my feet. The ceremony itself was everything Madison had dreamed of. 200 guests, a string quartet, flowers that probably cost more than most people's cars. She looked beautiful walking down the aisle, and Trevor looked appropriately handsome and wealthy standing at the altar. I watched from the back row, surrounded by distant relatives who made polite small talk about the weather and the lovely venue. No one asked what I'd been doing for the past year. No one seemed particularly interested in catching up or rebuilding relationships. It was during the reception dinner that things got truly awful. I'd been seated at table 12, tucked in a corner near the kitchen doors, with a collection of plus ones and acquaintances who didn't fit into the main family tables. The placement was deliberate, visible enough that no one could say I'd been excluded, but far enough from the action that my presence wouldn't embarrass anyone. The speeches started after the main course. Trevor's father talked about family legacy and the importance of choosing the right partner. Madison's maid of honor shared cute stories about their college friendship and Madison's determination to find her Prince Charming. Then Eleanor stood up with a champagne flute and a smile that could have cut glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she began, "to family and to knowing your place in the world." Her eyes found mine across the room. Some people spend their lives reaching for things beyond their grasp, pretending to be something they're not. But true wisdom comes from accepting reality and finding contentment in your proper station. The room was quiet, uncertain where this was going. "To those who understand that not everyone can live the same kind of life," Eleanor continued, raising her glass toward my table, "and to the grace to be humble about our limitations." The toast was aimed directly at me. Every person in that room understood that Eleanor Blackstone had just publicly called me a failure, who needed to accept my place as Madison's less successful sister. The applause was scattered and uncomfortable. People looked at their plates, at their drinks, anywhere but at me. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I stood up, preparing to leave quietly and preserve what little dignity I had left. And that's when the doors opened and Colonel Patricia Wells walked in. The ballroom went completely silent. 200 wedding guests turned to stare at the woman in full military dress uniform who had just walked through the doors. Colonel Patricia Wells moved with the kind of authority that made marble floors sound like drum beats under her boots. She was flanked by Captain Mitchell and 2 other officers, plus a civilian in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. They scanned the room methodically until Colonel Wells' eyes found mine. She walked directly toward me, ignoring the bewildered stares and whispered questions rippling through the crowd. "Ms. Victoria Hayes?" Colonel Wells said formally. "Yes," I managed, my voice barely audible. "Colonel Patricia Wells, United States Army Corps of Engineers. We need to speak with you about Project Stronghold." Madison materialized beside us, her wedding dress rustling with agitation. "Excuse me, this is a private wedding reception. I don't know who you think you are, but..." Colonel Wells didn't even glance at her. "Miss Hayes, we've been trying to reach you for final project completion documentation." Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with indignation. "This is completely inappropriate. I demand to know what's going on here." Colonel Wells looked at Eleanor with a cool assessment. "Ma'am, this is official military business with Ms. Hayes regarding a classified government contract." "Classified government contract?" Eleanor's voice pitched higher. "This woman works construction, temporary labor." The man with the briefcase stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackstone, I'm James Patterson from Pentagon Procurement. Ms. Hayes is one of our most valued civilian contractors. She's completed the most advanced secure residential facility ever constructed for the United States military." A murmur went through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did he say Pentagon?" Madison stared at me like she'd never seen me before. "Victoria, what is he talking about?" Colonel Wells continued. "Ms. Hayes, the final inspection was completed yesterday. Project Stronghold has been officially accepted by the Department of Defense with the highest commendation." She gestured to Captain Mitchell, who produced a thick manila envelope. "Your completion bonus, as stipulated in your contract, and these," she handed me a smaller envelope containing documents and keys. are the deed and keys to your property. Eleanor found her voice. Property? What property? James Patterson answered. The 47-acre estate in Lake Forest where Ms. Hayes' architectural design was constructed. Per her contract terms, ownership transfers to her upon successful project completion. Trevor's father pushed forward. As a real estate developer, he understood property values. How many acres? 47 acres on Lake Michigan, Patterson replied. The estate includes a 15,000-square-foot main residence with advanced security infrastructure. Current assessed value is $12.3 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. Someone's champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. Eleanor's mouth opened without producing sound. Madison grabbed a chair to steady herself. $12 million? William Blackstone whispered. Colonel Wells nodded. Ms. Hayes designed what is now the most secure private residence in the United States. Her architectural innovations have been classified for future military applications. Eleanor seemed to be having trouble processing this. But you were homeless. Madison said you were living in your car. I confirmed. 8 months ago, I was sleeping in my Honda behind a truck stop diner. That's when I received the RFP for this project, Captain Mitchell explained. The military was seeking an architect capable of designing an ultra-secure residential facility. Ms. Hayes' proposal was selected from over 40 submissions from major firms across the country. Madison stared at me. You were working on this the whole time? Classified projects require absolute secrecy, Colonel Wells said. Ms. Hayes wasn't permitted to discuss any aspect of her work. James Patterson opened his briefcase. Ms. Hayes, these are the keys to your home, along with documentation for the security staff already in place. The final payment transfer, $2.8 million, should appear in your account within 24 hours. More gasps from the crowd. Someone said, she's worth $15 million. As Colonel Wells prepared the final paperwork, I realized that for the first time in our adult lives, I was the one with power in our relationship with my family. Mrs. Blackstone, I said quietly to Eleanor, you were right about one thing. Some people do need to learn their place in the world. The difference is, I built mine. After Colonel Wells and her team left, the wedding reception transformed into something entirely different. The same guests who had whispered about my failures were now approaching with forced smiles and sudden interest in reconnecting. Ashley Cunningham, who'd been so condescending at the guest book, practically materialized beside me. Victoria, I had no idea about your government work. How exciting that must be. We should have lunch soon and catch up properly. The reversal was so swift it was almost comical. People who hadn't acknowledged my existence 20 minutes earlier were now positioning themselves for conversations, hoping to be associated with the woman who'd just become one of the wealthiest people in the room. But I wasn't interested in their sudden attention. I was watching Madison, who stood frozen near the head table, still processing what had just happened. Trevor was beside her, whispering urgently in her ear, probably explaining exactly how much money I now controlled. Eleanor Blackstone remained seated, staring into her champagne glass like it might contain answers. The woman who'd just publicly humiliated me about knowing my place was now calculating how dramatically she'd miscalculated the power dynamics in the room. I walked over to Madison, who looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Can we talk? I asked quietly. Privately? We found an empty side room off the main ballroom. Madison closed the door and immediately broke down. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known what you were working on. You'd have what? Treated me differently? Introduced me properly to Trevor's family? Madison's perfect wedding makeup was starting to smudge. I was trying to protect you. Eleanor can be so judgmental, and I thought if I minimized things. You told them I was homeless. You were homeless, Madison's voice cracked. When you called me 8 months ago, you were living in your car. I didn't know how to explain that to people like the Blackstones. So you made me sound like a charity case, someone to be ashamed of. Madison sat down heavily in one of the chairs. I was ashamed. Not of you, but of the situation, of how it would look to Trevor's family. They expect certain standards, and having a homeless sister would reflect badly on you. Yes, she whispered. And I know how terrible that sounds, but Victoria, You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Trevor's family has expectations about everything: who we associate with, where we vacation, what charities we support. I couldn't have them thinking our family was... what? Unstable, unreliable, the kind of people who let their daughters end up sleeping in cars. I looked at my sister, beautiful, perfectly dressed, married to wealth, but terrified of losing social standing, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of clarity about who she'd always been and who I'd become. Madison, I want you to understand something. When I was homeless, when I was at my absolute lowest point, I never stopped being myself. I cleaned floors and slept in my car, but I was still an architect. I was still capable, still intelligent, still worthy of respect. She looked up at me, tears making tracks down her cheeks. But you saw my circumstances and decided I was someone to be hidden, someone who would embarrass you. I was wrong, Madison said. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. I believed she was sorry, but sorry about what exactly? Sorry she'd hurt me? Or sorry she'd misjudged my financial potential? The project I've been working on, I continued, wasn't just a job. It was a chance to rebuild my entire life from nothing. While you were planning this wedding, I was designing something that will change everything for me. Madison wiped her eyes. Can you forgive me? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness wasn't about Madison deserving it. It was about whether carrying resentment would serve my future. I can forgive you, I said finally, but I can't forget how easily you wrote me off when I needed family most. Madison nodded, understanding that our relationship would never be the same. We returned to the reception, where the atmosphere remained charged with the energy of dramatic revelation. People continued approaching me with business cards and invitations, suddenly eager to be connected to a woman worth $15 million. Trevor made a point of congratulating me personally, his handshake lingering just a bit too long, his smile a bit too eager. Victoria, we should definitely stay in touch, maybe discuss some investment opportunities. Eleanor managed a stiff acknowledgement when I passed her table, but couldn't quite meet my eyes. I left the reception early, driving through the Illinois countryside toward my new home in Lake Forest. The keys Colonel Wells had given me felt strange in my hand. Physical proof that my life had changed completely in the span of a single conversation. The estate looked even more beautiful in the evening light. 47 acres of rolling landscape leading down to Lake Michigan, with the house I'd designed rising from the natural contours of the land like it had always belonged there. Maria Santos had been right all those months ago when she told me I deserved better. I just needed to build it myself. 6 months later, Hayes Security Architecture had completed 3 more government contracts and employed 22 people. I'd been featured in Architectural Digest and invited to speak at conferences around the world. Madison called regularly now, wanting to, quote, rebuild our relationship. I was polite but distant. Some bridges, once burned, leave foundations too damaged for reconstruction. But the real victory wasn't the money or recognition. It was the morning I woke up in my own home, surrounded by work I'd created, and realized I'd never again need anyone's permission to be successful. The woman they'd underestimated had built something they couldn't take away, buy, or diminish. I'd learned that when you have nothing left to lose, you discover exactly what you're capable of building. And sometimes, that's everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.